fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
LifeLock, how can I help?
The IRS said I filed my return, but I haven't.
1 in 4 tax-paying Americans has paid the price of identity fraud.
What do I do?
My refund, though.
I'm freaking out.
Don't worry, I can fix this.
LifeLock fixes identity theft guaranteed and gets your money back with up to $3 million in coverage.
I'm so relieved.
No problem. I'll be with you every step of the way.
1 in 4 was a fraud-paying American. Not anymore. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Welcome to Weird in the Wade, a podcast about all that's weird, wonderful, and a little off-kilter in the town of Biggleswade in Bedfordshire and its surrounding area. If you like your history with a pinch of the paranormal and your supernatural stories with some historical context, then this is the podcast for you. Whether it's the tale of the Potton Road poltergeist or discovering what's haunting Andy's house, grab a cuppa, sit back, and let me take you on a journey into the weird. It's 1968, the year civil rights and anti-war protests ignited across the US and then spread like wildfire to London, Northern Ireland and Europe. The swinging 60s were burning out with righteous anger and hope for a more liberal and liberated future. I suspect all of this social change felt far away to the people of Kempston in October of that year. 3 young lads around 17 are walking the dog. The press refer to the hound using the wartime name of Alsatian. German Shepherd was yet to make a comeback. We don't know the dog's name, but I'll call him Rex. We do know that one of the lads was called John, and he worked in his father's greengrocer's shop. These were uncomplicated lads, out for a stroll along the wooded path that runs from All Saints Church to Kempston Mill, alongside the river Great Ouse. The mill had only just ceased operating and in a year's time would be burnt to the ground. I imagine John and his mates chatting about what's on at the Granada in Bedford that week. The good, the bad and the ugly is making a return, and now the boys are fast approaching 18. They're going to chance their luck in being admitted to an X-rated Clint Eastwood flick. Without realising it, the October dusk has crept up on them. The riverbirds are making their eerie evening calls to one another. The sky is now mauve. The trees loom dark with just a few ragged leaves clinging to the skeletal branches. Beneath their feet, fallen leaves crunch. It has grown unusually still. There's just enough daylight to see the mist slither in from the river. It slinks through the reeds and the trees to swirl on the path in front of them. "We should get a move on," one lad mutters. John clips a lead onto Rex's collar. "Don't want to lose him in the fog," he explains. "It gives me the shivers." He gestures towards the swirling shroud of mist. The boys trudge on. In some places, the pockets of mist are insubstantial. In others, it billows thick like smoke. It's Rex who reacts first. He's been trotting patiently at John's side, tongue lolling, but suddenly he stops. His hackles are up and he growls, a low warning to something in front of them. The lads stop in their tracks. There is a dense patch of mist ahead of them. It is strangely still, and as they watch, it begins to change colour. A simple white shifts into a sulphurous yellow and gives way to a lurid green. As the colour changes, the mist appears to move, to take shape and form into something more solid. "What there?" John exclaims, his words trailing off, because as he speaks, the shape forms something they all recognise, a figure of a woman floating about a foot off the ground. She wears a long flowing dress of some lofty and wafting material. It's a deep forest green and it seems to glow from within, as does her skin, which is also tinged with the palest shade of mint, cold and icy. Her hair is like straggles of waterweed plastered to her head and face so that no features can be seen. The boys do not utter a word. They glance at one another, eyes darting, afraid to look away from the impossible vision in front of them. John reaches down to Rex, seeking comfort in his warm fur, but the dog's trembling only mimics his own. Rex's growls become more insistent, but also more like whimpers. Then the figure raises her hands to her face. Her fingers are skeletal and long. She brushes aside the strands of claggy, web-like hair to reveal a face as pale as bone. Where her eyes should be, there are dark, empty sockets. They are dark, but something glitters in the depths of the blackness. Something slithers in her eye sockets. John suddenly realises that she has worms or maggots or even leeches, maybe, deep inside her skull. As she tries to open her mouth, her lips are stuck with stringy strands of slime. All three boys scream and the dog howls, and the vision of the Green Lady is gone. You might expect the boys to keep quiet about seeing such a terrifying sight, but word gets out. Whispers amongst the younger children in Kempston grow until even the adults are hearing the rumours about John and his friends. "You know, John, the son of the greengrocer. Yeah, down-to-earth John, always with his dog Rex. Sensible lad. Well, he's been terrified by the sighting of the Green Lady by the river along Ladies' Walk, like back in the old days. It's been a while, but the older folk remember when she haunted that stretch regularly. The bell ringers at the church hear the rumours, and although they would like to be sensible Christians and trust in their Lord Jesus Christ, the superstition of the Green Lady is too much for them. Some remember the spate of drownings in the 1930s, which her appearance preceded, a dark time for the village. They do not want to invite such times again. They tell the vicar politely that they won't be coming to bell ringing practice during the evenings in winter. They'll stay at home and watch Coronation Street instead. The Reverend Kenneth Habermel, vicar of Kempston, is asked to comment on the latest ghost sightings. His response to the tales of the Green Lady is short and to the point. "It's all a terrible load of nonsense." Meanwhile, Kempston resident Maureen hasn't heard the rumours. She may be the only person who hasn't. But she's too busy for gossip and fireside tales. Maureen runs the Kempston Cub Scouts pack, and they meet near the Reverend Habermel's church. She is concerned, though, that her cub pack is not growing. She's had 9 lads join, but no more. Each lad had promised to bring along a friend, but on the allotted night, no friends were forthcoming. "Why?" Maureen asks the cubs. They shuffle sheepishly. No one speaks. Maureen asks again, quieter now. She says that she will listen to what they have to say. She worries that it's something she's done or said which has somehow put off the boys or the parents. She holds her breath. Maybe the little boys realise, because one by one they explain to their Arcala, Maureen, about John from the greengrocers and his friend's sighting of the Green Lady. Everyone is scared to walk along the river after dark now, they say, and many are afraid to walk there, even during the day. And that concludes all that I could find out about the 1968 sighting of the Green Lady of Kempston. I don't know if the bell ringers ever returned to evening practice, or if the Cub Scout group ever grew after the ghost tales died down. Why this story ends up being reported in the Daily Mirror in November 1968 is another mystery which we may never solve. Who went to the papers? Maureen and the Cubs? Or was it John? But this tale forms part of a much more extensive folk tradition of colourful women ghosts who haunt castles, waysides, rivers, houses, pubs, and theatres across the land. From grey, white and black ladies to red, green, blue and even pink, colourful lady ghosts are a fixture of our folklore and ghost lore. And as part of this episode focusing on women ghosts, women who are haunted, and women who collect, record and investigate hauntings, I want to explore what these tales tell us about women in the past, present and future. Welcome. Welcome to Weird in the Wade and this special episode to celebrate International Women's Day. I'm Nat Doig and I wanted to thank you all for your patience over the last 6 weeks as you've waited for new episodes of Weird in the Wade to return. I hope it's worth the wait, and I'm sure it will be. So yes, we're celebrating International Women's Day, but let's get this out of the way now. For those of you unfamiliar with Richard Herring's sterling work on social media, every International Women's Day, yes, there is an International Men's Day as well, and it's in November. To explore the subject of women who haunt or haunted and investigate the paranormal, I have brought together a group of women uniquely capable to help me in this endeavour. You'll hear from parapsychologist, author and queen of Team Believer on Uncanny, EvelynHollow, as well as psychologist, folklorist and queen of Team Sceptic on Uncanny, Deborah Hyde. I'm also joined by the fabulous Bethan Briggs-Miller, co-founder of the East Anglian Folklore Centre and co-creator of the podcasts Eerie Essex and Spectre of the Sea. I'm also joined by the lovely Steph Lay of City of Secrets Project and Into the Fog podcast team. But before I chat with these exceptionally knowledgeable and experienced women, let's have a look at the Green Lady of Kempston story in a bit more detail. The Green Lady. Kempston is found just southwest of Bedford and, in fact, predates the county town. Saxon artefacts found in Kempston show it was a thriving community in and before the time of Alfred the Great. Fast forward to the Norman Conquest and King Harold's brother, Earl Griff, held Kempston, but he lost his life alongside his more famous brother at the Battle of Hastings. Is Kempston a village or a town, you may wonder? And a little like Biggleswade, when the town extended in the 19th century, that area became known as Newtown or Kempston Newtown. And 150 years on, it is still referred to as both Kempston Village and Newtown. Either way, Kempston curves around a bend in the Great Ouse. The river has clearly shaped the life of Kempston through the ages. A watermill stood at this point for centuries, and some believe it may have been founded in Roman times. This was after Roman artefacts were found at the mill site in the early 20th century. Fishing, boating and bathing have all been popular pastimes on the Great Ouse at Kempston. Sadly, there have also been many deaths associated with drowning, from a terrible punting accident to misadventure when swimming, and sadly suicides. This stretch of the Great Ouse has seen much death. Interestingly, from a rather macabre search of newspaper archives that I did, looking from 1780 to 1980, I found that at least 2/3 of those who drowned in the waters at Kempston were men. Yet it is the ghost of a woman who is said to haunt the river's edge. Now, thinking about the past, it does make sense that more men drowned, particularly because young men were far more likely to be messing about on the river, as the song says, whether that was through boating or bathing or fishing. Often it seems drinking and hot weather contributed to these deaths by misadventure by men on the river. Fewer people learnt to swim before the mid-20th century, which only added to these tragedies. The women who drowned at Kempston tended to have taken their own lives, though sadly plenty of men did this as well. It is said that the Green Lady of Kempston did take her own life in the river. Some say in the Victorian period, others say during the English Civil War. She is definitely associated with the weather though, and in particular mist and fog. The Green Lady serves as a warning to the unwary to avoid these riverside paths during poor weather. When I spoke with Deborah Hyde, she chose Green Lady stories as her favourite for the colourful women in folklore. And as she explains, Green Ladies are often associated with water and its dangers.
Green. Yeah, I like all of the sort of the nursery bogies, the water bogies that will get children. There's Grindylow and Jenny Greenteeth and Nellie Longarms, all of these kind of Yorkshire and Lancashire type water boggarts. I mean, there's reasonable evidence to suggest they were created fairly late to literally try and discourage children from going too near water where they may not be able to swim and where they would drown. But there's that sort of green element to it.
But before I move on to more conversations with my guests, the Green Lady of Kempston made news headlines again in 1998. This was when the western leg of the Bedford bypass was due to be built. It was planned to cut straight across Ladies' Walk and Church Path, where the Green Lady is said to haunt. A paranormal investigator named Kenneth Parsons predicted that if the road went ahead, it would not just be unlucky for the wildlife and the peace and quiet of the village, but, and I quote, ghostly apparitions could drive motorists to their deaths, because when you build on sacred ground, it will inevitably leave an imprint in the fabric of the land. Like a giant tape recorder, there will be uncharacteristic accidents, health problems, bad luck, and a bad atmosphere. The road was built, and thankfully it seems Parsons' predictions did not come to pass. Although Kempston has traffic problems like anywhere else, most seem to be centred away from the western bypass. Now, all of those roads around that side of Bedford do flood regularly, but I'm guessing scientifically you could explain that by them being built so close to the river. What I do find interesting is that Parsons links the tale of the Green Lady ghost with pagan folklore and the sacredness of the land. To him, the Green Lady is not merely a phantom that frightens, but a link to a past that is also shrouded in mist. So what can these colourful lady ghosts and women who haunt tell us about women of the past, present and future? The first thing I asked my guests was whether they had any observations about ghosts who are perceived as female. Have they been ascribed feminine characteristics, for example? EvelynHollow quite rightly raised caution, though, when ascribing anything to a paranormal entity, as she explains.
So for me, I think that we bring a lot of ourselves to these things. So in terms of psychology, the problem is that you are viewing everything through the lens of the human brain, of human psychology, and you project human psychology onto non-human things, onto non-conscious objects, onto sounds, onto everything.
Yeah.
So the most obvious example of this is that if you're experiencing what you believe to be haunting phenomena, and there's sort of banging or unexplained noises, and then say you ask a question, you hear a bunch of banging and you say, is anybody there? And the banging gets louder. It's right beside you on the wall. You will ascribe that possibly as being angry. And all that's happened is that there's an increase in decibels. That's it. But we attribute the sort of escalation of sound to things like anger. And I think something similar happens here, where in hauntings, we project human psychology onto something that we don't understand. So somebody sees something, they think it's a ghost, and then they infer either from pure feeling, from behavior, or from visual stimuli, a gender. So they see something that looks like it has a long outfit on. We might say, well, that's a dress, therefore we might think that's a woman. But what if there's not enough visual stimuli for us to be able to guess the gender? So people then infer it from movement. So if it's something that sort of, it glides through or is very sort of passive, doesn't interact with you, isn't threatening, I think we're probably seeing that people are more likely to ascribe that as being female. And they'll describe presences that are seen as comforting as female, whereas when something is aggressive, so if you look particularly at poltergeist cases, even if there's no communication whatsoever and there's no visual phenomena, people are more likely, in my opinion, to give it a male name because they ascribe the violence of a poltergeist to male behaviour, essentially.
My other guests, Deborah Hyde, Steph Lay and Bethan Briggs-Miller, also felt that female ghosts, or ghosts that are perceived to be women or were women in life, are perceived differently, as seen as more passive.
They've been the victim of something as well.
Yes.
They've died prematurely, or they've been killed by their husbands, or they've died in a road accident. A lot of road ghosts are women, especially phantom hitchhikers, that disappear as soon as you get to your destination.
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because certainly the ones that I've thought about, the female ghosts, they're more portrayed in terms of what's happened to them. So they might have had a tragic relationship, which is why they ended up kind of haunting a specific location, or they were a lady who fell on hard times, had some kind of misfortune. So it's very much about circumstance around them, whereas the male ghosts, a lot of them tend to be framed as the legend of so-and-so. And there's much more around their mythology as something that can disturb or frighten people. Not necessarily harm them, but certainly a presence that you'd want to avoid. You wouldn't go down that alleyway because the ghost of the highwayman will come and ... do something to you. Whereas the female ghosts, being more kind of, like you say, gentle and floaty, they don't seem to have that sense of threat to them. It's not quite answered your question, I don't think, but certainly looking at those different patterns in the things that male and female ghosts are likely to do to you if you encounter them, that's something that stood out to me.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree with Steph. There is definitely more of a passive nature about a lot of the female ghosts. There's almost like this, for example, if the person has been done wrong and they're seeking revenge, it's more revenge in a male ghost and it's more like despair in a female ghost. I mean, it's not everywhere. I mean, from where I come from originally in Wales, there's several female ghosts that will literally tear your flesh off. They've sort of become this sort of like avenging sort of like wraith in the afterlife. So Welsh female ghosts. Whoop. But in general, you do find that a lot of the female ghosts, there's a lot of how do you put this? Anniversary ghosts. So you'll find a lot of female ghosts will visit the area where they were killed or where something tragic happened. I haven't yet come across that so much in male ghosts. And especially in Essex, we had the witch trials. I mean, there was a lot of ghosts who were massacred and tortured. So there's a very sort of dark history to female ghosts in particular in this area. And that's a very one-sided, gender-heavy ghost collective, really.
If you believe that what you were witnessing or experiencing is a haunting, and what you're experiencing is something from the past in particular, and we're not talking about, going back 5-10 years, we sometimes talk about going back a century or so, sometimes more, is it that if those were once people who did live their life, men had more dynamic roles. They were permitted to have jobs. They were permitted to be in the army. They were permitted to be businessmen, and women were not. Women, the only thing they were permitted to do was to homemake. So potter about, cleaning things, cooking things, and in more stately homes, they wouldn't even be doing any of that. What they actually would have been permitted to do was doing things like learn small skills. I say small skills, but to learn things like crochet or knitting or to play the piano, maybe to paint, to read poetry, and their day would basically be of leisure. It would be of learning things, meeting people, dressing nicely, and or doing arts and crafts, essentially. And so when we see male ghosts on horseback and being soldiers and or drunk falling around the place in haunted pubs and things like that, if they were once people, then that is accurate to the time, depending on the time period, depending on the place, depending on location. That is accurate. Women were not permitted to have a wide variety of jobs. It's like secretary to nanny to maid, pretty much. And even women higher up, especially, would have been women of leisure, and so wouldn't have been doing very much. So if you're in a stately home and you see a bird just floating about the top balcony, chances were she wasn't doing much else other than floating about the top balcony. She literally wasn't allowed to. So, maybe, you can look at that from a believer and a skeptic perspective, I believe.
I really loved this point that Evelyn made. Whether ghosts are the spirits of our ancestors or possible time slips, or we're projecting what we know about the past onto strange but explainable phenomena, the role of women in the past will shape what we experience today in hauntings. Are the ghostly women or the stories about them already changing? There's plenty of late 19th and 20th century ghostly nurses cropping up, which did make me wonder why we don't get ghostly doctors. Or do we? And will more of them be women to reflect the changes in medicine in the last 60 years? One of my favourite ghost stories from Fife in Scotland is a mid-20th century ghost of a woman who took the bus to work as a ghostly form, as she did in her life. I asked Evelyn how we might go about studying the way gender interacts with ghost stories and ghostly phenomena.
As I go around sort of country, particularly with Uncanny, I hear such an insane variety and kind of depth of cases. And it would be interesting to look statistically at one particular type of phenomena and then break it down by classification or into classifications of groups. So that could be things like gender or age range or even job background, things like that, of the person observing it, and see if there's any patterns. Are men more likely to ascribe female names to things versus women more likely to ascribe male things? And it would be interesting. I think the individual differences are kind of impossible to escape no matter what you do.
Yes.
And although it would be interesting, because if you look at younger generations who probably have a much more open interpretation gender, or hopefully a more kind of open and accepting or a different viewpoint on it, if they grow up to experience haunting phenomena, will they view it differently? Only in absence really of any sort of visual cues. It's different if you see a person who is quite visually, strongly female looking, dressed in very, typically female attire, things like that. We'd have to look at cases where that's not present. And then ask people, where did you get the name David for your poltergeist from? Did you make it up? Because it's comforting to nickname stuff. And we do that all the time. Anytime I lived in a place in Edinburgh that had a mouse, I always named it. And things like
spiders.
That.
My dad always names the spiders in his shed.
My dad was pretty similar. And it was, everything had a name. And so for some people, it's not like they're getting some sort of psychical impression or that something has contacted them. It's just, we have weird shit happening in our house, and it's easier if we call it David than to call it the poltergeist. Talk to something. And so it kind of makes the research quite difficult, because there's a lot of nuance in here that maybe researchers would have difficulties with. But I think it's going to be really interesting to watch younger generations as they grow up and how they interact with haunting phenomena.
Because Steph Lay from the City of Secrets project is collecting ghost stories in Milton Keynes, I wanted to ask her if she'd noticed any trends within those ghost stories. And it turns out that Steph's background is in data analysis, so she is one of the best people to ask about this. And this is what she had to say.
I've been collecting these stories from across Milton Keynes now since April last year, and it's one of those places which is a bit of a joke, and that people would think it wouldn't have any hauntings at all. But I've actually now collected 47 and published them on the blog, which in just those few months is incredible. The interesting thing is, most of the accounts that I've had, people aren't actually reporting a gender of what they're experiencing. They're not all apparitions. They're not all ghost stories. Even I've got some kind of just strange experiences that people can't explain. But for the ones where there is actually an entity, where the gender's identifiable, there's 26 of those, which is actually really quite interesting. And most of the ones that people encounter are male coded, interpreted as male. But I then also looked at the patterns between if it was men reporting male ghosts, women reporting female ghosts. No, there's a crossover. I've got more female experiences, so it's 77% women, but it seems to be across the board. The people who are encountering things, they're not just seeing their own gender, they're seeing a range of them, but certainly the unidentifiable ones come out as most.
Now, I couldn't have EvelynHollow as a guest on Weird in the Wade without asking her about poltergeists and their association with adolescent girls. Is there any truth in this? It seems to be a really pervasive idea within the paranormal world.
Yeah, this drives me nuts. So it's a repeated point that I absolutely hate, that I cannot seem to escape in my career. So I can tell you exactly where this comes from. It comes from one particular parapsychologist, William G. Roll. And when he was looking at poltergeist cases, he was writing that it seemed to be that poltergeist cases were fixated on adolescent people, so teenagers, preteens, things like that, and in particular teenage girls. Now, I couldn't tell you the dates of the publications of this work off the top of my head, but I know he was actively writing in the 60s and I think 70s, so it's this sort of time period. And that is largely where this comes from. There is no data statistically to support it whatsoever, but he was one of the earliest people to write quite specifically about poltergeist, so you can understand that his work is seen as very influential. And so Karen and I, Dr. O'Keefe and I, a couple of years ago, started discussing this, and we started to look through more modern statistical pollings of poltergeist. So poltergeist cases were broken down into categories and different things that happened within the cases, and you can see the numbers at which they occur and things like that.
Yeah.
Now, I think the data we looked at was 80s, 90s. So, and obviously it's not hugely comprehensive, but yeah, it was kind of roughly sort of split in the middle between whether it was males or females who were more likely to enter poltergeist cases. Now, the difficulty with trying to get modern, up-to-date data on this is the first issue we have from a data analysis standpoint is that we cannot agree on what a poltergeist is. So this drove me mental for years. Some people were saying that there was 3 stages to poltergeist. Some people were saying there was 5. And so I went through a metric ton of poltergeist cases and worked out roughly what I felt the stages were, which I've published, Hollow's poltergeist scale. And I did that because I was a lecturer in statistical data analysis for several years, and it drove me mental that you cannot even begin analysing the data if we cannot agree on what qualifies as a poltergeist case.
Yeah.
So that's the difficulty. The first thing we'd have to do is take as many cases as humanly possible, and then we'd have to agree on which ones qualify as poltergeist, and then from there we'd be able to run analysis like, okay, age ranges of people involved in the case, ethnic background, religious beliefs, sexuality, all the things that are classed as individual differences, whatever you want to look at. But it's tremendously difficult because we can't agree on what constitutes a poltergeist.
Yeah.
But in my experience, through years and years of being a parapsychologist and having heard, I don't even know how many poltergeist cases. I mean, poltergeist cases, they're still actually proper poltergeist, like full-blown poltergeist cases are still quite rare, actually. But I've certainly heard plenty, probably more than most. And I would say that I don't feel that it's one way or the other. I feel like it's a fairly even split. And I feel that often, actually, the people that experience poltergeist cases are families or young couples. I don't feel that there's a focus around, particularly around adolescents. I don't feel that it affects preteens or teenagers more than anyone else. I actually think the most common type of person who experiences a poltergeist case are people who are usually middle-aged or slightly older, and they're usually couples or people who've moved into a place that are just starting a family or about to start a family, that sort of thing. But that I can't tell you that that's statistically true. I just can tell you that from my experience, my impression is that's what it is.
This gave me the opportunity to share with Evelyn my theory about menopausal women maybe attracting poltergeists. And as a menopausal woman, I am very invested in this theory. Hear what Evelyn had to say after this very short ad break. And remember, if you don't want to hear adverts, then you can sign up to Weird in the Wade's Patreon and listen to all new episodes ad-free and also get bonus content. There's a link in the show description.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Selling your car shouldn't feel like a second job. It should feel easy. With Carvana, it is. Just visit Carvana.com, enter your license plate or VIN, answer a few quick questions, and get an offer in minutes. Like what you see? We'll pick it up right from your door and hand you your check. No haggling, no hassle, no problem. Car selling made easy on
Carvana.
Pickup fees may apply.
This is your fix.
I'm your host, Stassi Schroeder. Welcome to Tell Me Lies, the official podcast. What's the most unhinged thing of season 3?
Steven, because he's so evil.
I do think he is misunderstood.
You see everyone face consequences.
It's intoxicating. The writers just know how to trick you. There's always a twist in this show. Tell Me Lies, the official podcast, January 6th, and stream the new season of Tell Me Lies, January 13th on Hulu and Hulu on Disney+.
Well, that's funny because when we were on the Uncanny tour, somebody else mentioned that on the tour, saying that they felt like listening to poltergeist cases, they thought the same thing. They were like women, they were all around perimenopausal or menopausal.
Yeah.
And they wondered if some of it was that. And I mean, from the skeptical standpoint, it was like, well, look at the physical effects of that can be really extreme. You know, a brain fog, hot, cold, really disturbed sleep. All kinds of like really quite serious physical changes as well as chemical and hormonal changes in the brain. The thing where that gets difficult is when you've got multiple other people living in the house, and even when you're not there, they start experiencing really strong phenomena and things like that. It's an interesting standpoint, you know. I think the menopause is something that's actually starting to be talked about more in the media now, which is great. I'm glad that people are talking about it now, but as a parapsychologist, you know, it sounds hilarious to say, you know, poltergeist and the word menopause in the same sentence, but as a parapsychologist, it is your job to kind of look at all of the phenomena, and if it's something that really affects you psychologically, then it is something we have to consider.
The next topic that I discussed with my guests was around women who experience hauntings and how their experiences are treated by the rest of the world, and whether that's changed also over the last few hundred years. We start this time with Deborah Hyde, who raises the really important aspect of how a society's religious or spiritual outlook impacts on how women are treated when it comes to spiritual or paranormal matters.
I think it matters the kind of religious system you have, because when you have this hierarchical, credential-based system, a person gets their credibility from the exams they've passed, the career ladder they've ascended, and the uniform they're entitled to wear. They're part of an institution. You know, you have to do something. But that path to authority has been closed in the West to women in religion until very recently. And if women wanted to mark themselves out as having some sort of spiritual power, they had to demonstrate something that was intrinsic to them. They had to be rather than do. And that was hard enough in medieval times with holy women that you can read about, like Julian of Norwich or Marjorie Kemp. Although Marjorie Kemp narrowly avoided being caught up in a witchcraft accusation. But it was close enough to impossible in post-Reformation many parts of Europe and America. So for the last 300 or 400 years, women have had to tread a careful path if they want to be spiritually eminent. And then in the mid-19th century, there was the rise of spiritualism. Even though it originated from a couple of bored teenage girls playing tricks, and they did admit this. First of all, it clearly tuned into a spiritual need that was there because there were people who were willing to promote them. And secondly, it became allied with the rising tide of first wave feminism and suffrage. So this was a way of women having powers from what they were, you know, their intrinsic powers. It was kind of like a 19th, 20th century way of being a cunning woman. But it did link into conventional power, you know, suffrage and women's rights. Traditionally, women have been the experiencer of peculiar events, and men have been the commentators upon them. So I'm looking at things like poltergeist cases, like the Throckmorton girls in War Boys, who charged a local woman with being a witch, or in the Salem Witches, where a load of girls had what appears to be mass sociogenic illness. So many poltergeist cases have centered around women who've kind of been stuck in a small space and been probably quite intelligent and repressed and wanted to express themselves. But it's been commented on by men. So you've got, you know, Joseph Glanville with Sodicissimus Triumphatus, with the drummer of Tedworth, for example. Or you've got John Wesley with the Epworth Rectory ghost. the angles that people have come at it from has varied.
Do we think that in real life haunting cases, when they're written up by the media or by researchers, that women are treated differently to men?
Yes, is my answer. And do you know what? Because I have been thinking about this. I can't exactly put my finger on it either. It's just when you read a report or a book or like a real life podcast, anything that deals with like a person's story, it's not every time, I've got to say, but more often than not, the validity is questioned more when it's a woman being the witness. I don't know, Steph, I don't know if you've come across that. Again, I can't put my finger on it. Maybe you can.
I think it is something that's changing over time. Certainly, the kind of older, more stereotypical approach would be to see women as hysterical, or possibly something hormonal, sleep deprived. You know, there's something that is causing them to see things, which is the dismissal first, before you get into we rule out all of that, and there's still a kind of kernel of something at the end of that, and then we'll investigate. Whereas men coming forward, I think historically has been seen as, aren't they brave to put themselves out there as something that people might mock or take the mick out of? It's definitely changing, and I think we have got a bit of the uncanny effect to thank for that. This whole area of people sharing their experiences, thank you, Danny. It seems to be more acceptable for people to come forward, you know, male, female, or even where we're hearing from children as well, because typically they wouldn't have been believed as much as adults. So I think we've got a better listening culture emerging from that. But yeah, certainly in the past, I think a lot of women's accounts have been dismissed quite unfairly, I think.
It's easier to spread stories now. Like, I think, I know we all vilify, and I've done it, social media, but it's so easy to connect now and for people to share their stories. I mean, just as you say, with the Uncanny group, let's just take that as an example, the amount of fan groups. And like, there's a fan group specifically for your own stories.
Yeah.
And there's never been anything quite like it. I think since like social media, if you wanted to tell your story, you had to go through probably more hurdles than men. But I think the fact now that it's very easy to get your story out there, there's less hurdles. There's still some more, but it is getting better, as you say, Steph.
And I think it's easier for people to just check if what they're experiencing is strange, certainly on that group, and something that I see quite a bit with the comments that I look at on the Into the Fog channel as well. People are not necessarily saying, this has definitely happened to me. They're saying, I experienced this thing. Does anybody else think it's strange? Or what would you have thought in these circumstances? And the fact that there's a dialogue then going where people are discussing it in a space that is safe and supportive and non-judgmental, that's changing. And yeah, I know we can all say social media is terrible and it has terrible aspects, but certainly that point of connection, I think, is really valuable in this space particularly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Having Bethan Briggs-Miller on Weird in the Wade meant that I could ask her some questions that were very specific to Essex. Her podcast, of course, is Eerie Essex. And I wondered if the Essex girl stereotype at all infected ghost stories in that county.
When you see journalists, as soon as it's a woman from Essex, they will... It's actually men as well, because they will... More women, I say, they will make the Love Island and The Only Way is Essex comments. You know, it's almost like they can't help themselves, which I find really annoying, because I don't think it's, even if you do like those things, I don't think that takes away from your story. I think that's very, very harmful to put that as a negative. But yeah, you do see that sort of like stereotype cropping up less and less, I'd say. But I mean, looking back at like the history of Essex, the Essex girl does stem from those witch trials. And I mean, I know there was witch trials all over the country, but Essex was where we had that horrible, horrible man, Matthew Hopkins, you know, like the original incel, who I didn't realize he died at 27, how much damage he did as such a young man. And responsible for so many, like thousands of deaths. And it's not even, what really shocks me about it is they have statistics, they have numbers of the women who died. Not all of them were reported. I mean, there was some that never even made it to trial. There was a woman called Betty Puttock who lived on the outskirts of Colchester, and she happened to be next to a hay cart when she said hello. The wheel fell off, You can see where this is going.
Yeah.
The villagers dragged her out of her house and hung her before Matthew Hopkins and his people even got there.
Mm.
How many times did that happen? We're only seeing like a tip of the iceberg almost, and people like were seeking their own revenge. But one thing that's interesting is like when you talk about the witch trials and you say, you know, how many women died, there's always someone who will say, oh yeah, but men died too. They did, but not for being witches, for fraternizing with these women. It was still the women who were seen as these evil beings, and the men were under their spell. And it's still, even like the argument today still has that weight behind it. It's still like, oh, not victim blaming, but I can't think of another way of putting it sometimes. And yeah, I think that has had an effect and has lingered with this Essex girl image. It was a very long way to go around and say yes.
No, and it's a really important point. Bedfordshire was a county that thankfully Matthew Hopkins only lightly touched, and yet we still had witch trials and women like Mary and Mother Sutton before the time of Matthew Hopkins being accused of witchcraft and executed. So the legacy of witchcraft is still felt, I think, in England and Scotland in particular. But changing the subject, I wanted to also speak with Deborah Hyde about scepticism, because this could be my own prejudice, but I always associate scepticism with being more male dominated. And that's not to say that I don't think women are skeptics. I do. I think there are plenty of women skeptics out there. But I think that quite often it's the male skeptics that we get to hear from. They're the ones that seem to dominate the conversation, particularly in the past. So I was really interested to hear what Deborah had to say.
I go to a lot of skeptics meetings everywhere, as you can imagine, worldwide, not just within the UK. And there are lots of female skeptics. It depends on what kind of subject they kind of latch onto to campaign with, I suppose. There's a lot in skepticism being done with alt-med, for example. So you might think, oh, well, you know, so-and-so cares a lot about homeopathy, but she probably has an opinion about ghosts as well. So I think that skepticism is probably slightly preferred by men, but I know a lot of female skeptics.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask Deborah if she felt that women were generally more likely to believe in ghosts than men. There seems to be a lot of research out there that backs this up.
Well, this is the lumberjack hypothesis, isn't it? That you're not going to have a lumberjack believing in a ghost. I think the fact is, when I speak at an event about ghosts, I know that 80% of my audience is going to be female. And when I go to speak at an event about UFOs, I know that 80% of my audience is going to be male. It's just the way it is. It seems that people's predispositions are functions somewhat of their sex. Of course, you don't know which direction that goes in. You don't know whether or not the socialization of that sex has caused personality attributes that are going to be associated with belief in one or the other, or whether it's the other way around.
Yeah,
so
that kind of nature-nurture thing.
So we don't know really. Perhaps men like to associate their unusual beliefs with technology, you know, with techie stuff, with aliens and alien technology. Something that I would say, perhaps some people would disagree, but I do think that women in general have a higher social intelligence, and that's going to mark them out for more, just on average, you know, clearly not all men, not all women, but it's going to mean that you can have a higher social contagion of certain ideas or certain behaviours, and that's going to make a difference. So in my experience, it might be a stereotype, but I think it's based in reality, certainly at the moment.
And at last, I asked my guests if they had a favourite colourful lady ghost, and if they knew anything about why we associate certain colours with certain ghosts.
I took an interest in these sorts of ghosts right at the start of my career and started trying to ascertain whether or not the colours corresponded to anything. Like, I couldn't work out where we were getting this from. Was it a visual thing, like you said, just what they're wearing? We're saying Green Lady because she's got a green coat on, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
Or was there some sort of reason why particular types of ghosts were assigned a colour. You know, did they do something? Like white ladies are almost always connected to kind of unfinished business, jilted lovers, women who were abandoned, women kind of scorned in love, women who have been murdered by their partners, or things like that. And statistically, it seems that they're more likely, if it's described as being a white lady, to be connected to some sort of, you know, tragedy, especially sort of connected to love and untimely death and things like that. But the rest of them, there didn't seem to be any particular sort of rhyme or reason. It was mostly just based, like you said, on what they were wearing. I have filmed or recorded things in lots of castles up and down the country. And I always like when you get a blue lady. For some reason, you know, the grey ladies are always just that people see things out the corner of their eye and they're kind of wispy and undefined. White ladies are always connected to some sort of horrendous tragedy. I often find whenever you got a blue lady, it was just, like we've said previously, some sort of passive ghost hanging about the castle, usually connected to like a kind of lounge or a ballroom or something like that. They're always like sat at a piano or they're reading a book or something like that, kind of undisturbing someone. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's the clothing or if they've just always been known as the blue lady and now we don't know why. But I found that anytime there was a castle with a blue lady, they were always really passive. They just sort of sat there reading a book. And I always think if you're going to have to come back in the next life, you might like to come back as a lady who lives in a really ancient medieval castle whose job is to just basically just sitting around by the fireplace reading books. I always think if I do come back, that's a nicer way to come back, so perhaps that's my favourite.
Now, we know that Deborah Hyde chose green ladies, and in particular those associated with water and sprite or fairy-like creatures. And Deborah went on to explain a bit more about the colours that these creatures are attributed to have.
One of the theories that came out later was that if they were green, then they must have been fairies. But that's a way of us kind of just applying a colour wash or just a wash, just a theory wash, without realising what the historical process was. Because people didn't really start talking about green fairies and white fairies and black fairies, red fairies and things until kind of the 16th century. And it was very much to do with high magic as well. It wasn't sort of cunning folk village magic. It wasn't folklore. It was, you know, it was sort of Renaissance, Kabbalistic, high kind of magic. And it was associated in any case with their temperaments rather than with literally their skin, possibly in the way they dressed.
But we have a haunted painting in Hollytrees Museum. It's got the Grey Lady ghost. And I love I love a ghost that is connected to an item or a place, but also the fact that it's a colourful ghost as well. She's got everything going, and she likes to look out the window on certain nights. She's an anniversary ghost, a colourful ghost, an object ghost. And she's been known to throw things around, so a little bit of poltergeist as well.
Yes, this was a really interesting one to think about. And I'd hoped that I'd find a local one in Milton Keynes. So I did a little bit of research, and there's a vague rumour of a Grey Lady in Bradwell Abbey, but I couldn't find anything about her. So I went back to where I grew up. I come from Leicester, and being obviously a very old city, it's got a lot of haunting history. But the one that I particularly love in this is the White Lady, who haunts our Guildhall in Leicester. For anybody who's ever been there, it is an old 14th century medieval hall. And the fascinating thing is it's right in the city centre. So you can be on the market buying your produce and walk around the corner, and there's this beautiful old white and black timbered kind of low old looking building. And it looks like it should be haunted, and it definitely is. So along with the White Lady, there's ghostly policemen, ghostly dogs and cats. Like Bethan was saying there, this place has got everything, but the White Lady hangs out particularly in the library. And she's been said that she's been responsible for moving furniture overnight, for making banging noises. But the bit that I love about her is that she floats over regularly to the King James Bible that always sits on display in the library, and she flicks through the pages until she gets to a certain passage in Deuteronomy, which she likes to leave the Bible open to this one. And it's the passage about witchcraft and divination, and that thou should definitely not do any of those things. And the staff have closed the Bible, left it closed, and come open in the morning, and it's open. to those pages, which I find fascinating. And I tried to do a bit of digging into if we knew anything more about her, because White Lady, as you were saying, is very much like a throwaway line based on her appearance, a little bit about her behaviour, but nothing else. But I did find one account that her actual name was Mary, no surname, and she died by falling down the stairs in the Guildhall. And this account said that she'd been buried in a little private cemetery, which I think might be made up because there isn't actually a cemetery there. There was a friary there a long time before. She could potentially have been buried there. But the interesting thing about her as well is she's quite often confused for being a monk. So some people see a White Lady, some people see a figure in robes and say it's a monk. So not only has she got all of these wonderful skills and abilities, she's also having to defend herself against being misgendered and given the wrong profession in what she's doing. But no, I find the White Lady of the Guildhall absolutely fascinating. She's my pick.
Oh, she sounds brilliant. And can people visit the Guildhall?
Yes, yep, you can go in and the library is always open. You can go and look around. And interestingly on that one, there is also some CCTV, which is apparently a presence there. I've had a look at it. It doesn't actually look like a figure. It looks like a patch of light crawling across the floor. And it's in a different room. It's not actually in the library. It's in the mayor's chamber in the Guildhall. And you would think it's just headlights going across the floor. But looking at the floor plan, there's no windows on that side. So there is something moving across the floor there, which looks absolutely fascinating. They do have ghost hunts there, ghost walks there. So
brilliant.
Yeah.
Excellent. That's another one to add to the list. Fantastic. My final question to my guests was to get a recommendation or recommendations from them of women involved in paranormal investigation, collecting ghost stories or folklore, who they wanted to champion.
The first person that popped into my brain, there's a Scottish parapsychologist called Caroline Watt. She's written several books on parapsychology. I think she's like one of the people who's co-authored the main book that's like an introduction to parapsychology. There's like, 5 or 6 editions of it, and she's I think she's the co-author on it. And she's also written the kind of beginner's guide to parapsychology. So she writes a lot of the kind of entry texts to it. She also is part of lots of studies on near-death experiences. She essentially was part of a team that worked out that out-of-body experiences result from a failure to integrate multi-sensory information from one's body, which results in the disruption of the phenomenological elements of self-representation. So that's like, why do people see a tunnel of light, when they're dying? Things like that. So, really, really interesting stuff. She also looked at things like eye movement and lying, which I think is really interesting. She works with Richard Wiseman. So I know that both they were part of a group that published research into the connection between eye movements and telling lies, basically. Because there's this whole kind of theory, if you've ever watched Lie to Me, like the TV series, that like micro movements in your body give away tells when you're lying.
Yeah.
And they found no evidence that eye movements can be used to determine if someone's lying. And in terms of like her core academic contribution to the field of parapsychology, so obviously parapsychology, it takes a lot of flack from all the other studies, as you can imagine. It is Mulder in the basement of studies in the big building with the rest of the normal agents. Previously, there was huge issues with obviously study replication, because a lot of what you're studying is very strange, anomalous phenomena. It's very fleeting. It can sometimes be very subjective, things like that. So there's huge issues with that. And so in 2012, Caroline Watt and Jim Kennedy founded a study register specifically for parapsychology. And so what this does is essentially let people, pre-registration of studies is very important in order for lots of things. It's basically for scientific and academic rigor, and it's very important for the scientific method of how things are tested. So they actually built this register for parapsychology. And in 2019, she was able to actually produce a peer-reviewed scientific paper reporting on the success of the technique. So she hasn't just worked in the field, lots of really interesting work on like near-death experiences and things, mostly near-death experiences, but she did also help to improve the actual scientific rigor of the field of parapsychology as a whole. She works very purely in the academic field, and so if you're not familiar with the academic field of parapsychology or don't work in it, she's probably not that well heard of. Like, I don't know how often she does things like radio interviews or television or things like that. But yeah, really, really interesting woman, and was kind of right at the forefront of pushing parapsychology, particularly in Scotland and in Edinburgh. So yeah, I think she would be my nomination probably.
I mean, I've been interested in all sorts of people. There's in the 19th century, there's Lady Wilde who picked up a load of Irish folklore. There was Mrs. Crowe who wrote a classic book, The Night Side of Nature. She was a bit gullible, but she collected a lot of stories. And then in the 20th century, you've got these folklorists, really hardworking folklorists like Ethel Redkin and Theo Brown and Christina Hull. So there are women all over the place. Perhaps they just haven't scrabbled for most attention the way men have. My favourite, the one that I'm going to champion, and she may not be all that obscure perhaps, is Susan Blackmore. She did a PhD in parapsychology at the University of Surrey, and she started out as a believer and became a skeptic through her studies. She researched an awful lot of things like psychokinesis and precognition. And now these days she does a lot of work on consciousness. And she personally had a big out-of-body experience, and I've had those, so I know how compelling they are. But she went through her PhD process and found nothing. She got a PhD for finding nothing. It was a very rigorous process. But of course that matters. That absolutely matters. And in the 90s, she did a large study of ostensibly paranormal experiences. And most of them really fell into the category of sleep paralysis. And when we think about a lot of paranormal experiences now, sleep paralysis is one of our first go-to places. And Sue Blackmore was the person who made that line in the sand. And I think I know Sue. I interviewed her once for a magazine, and I spoke about her respectable career. And she said, "How dare you? I didn't have a respectable career," because she was one of the people who made the study of all these strange subjects respectable. She was one of the people who was starting out with the Fruit Loop subject and made us realise that it's important to study it.
I know you said a name. I've got a blinking list.
I bet.
I mean, where to start? I mean, I would start with Natalie Doig and Steph Lay, who are awesome. I mean, EvelynHollow, Deborah Hyde, I know they were on here as well. Jo Hickey Hall, who collects modern fairy sightings, and Icy Sedgwick from up north. I blinking love her, who specialises in the Gothic. And Juliette Clemery, who's on Out There Paranormal. She's a medium as well as a ghost hunter, so she covers all bases. And my friend Gemma Oakley, who I run the Folklore Centre with, and Elsa Clark, who's my podcast wife. She's my other eerie half, and I could keep going on. I know I've left out people, but I'm so tired of my brain. I've got names of just starting to seep out, but there are some amazing women in this field.
There really are. Thank you, Bethan. What about you, Steph?
It will have been on Bethan's list as well, but if I could just pop it back in her brain from where it's crept out. Emma Hallahan as well, the work
Emma Hallahan. How could I not? Yes.
Yep. So I was ticking them off as you were going through those. I'd add another local one from the Buckinghamshire area, and that's Dr. Terry Howie-Moore. And she is our kind of bard of Stony Stratford in the storytelling that she does. She's written a brilliant book of the folklore around Buckinghamshire, and she's been so supportive to me in helping me source old folk stories. She's not kind of unknown, she's extremely well known around here, but probably not more widely. So yeah, Red Phoenix she goes by. So I certainly,
that's a good name.
Definitely credit her.
I have discovered so much making this episode. Don't forget to check out the blog, where there are links to more information about all the women mentioned and the places and ghost stories talked about. I think for me, one of the biggest takeaways from making this episode is how women's roles in the spiritual and paranormal sphere have changed over the years. In the past, women's life choices were far narrower than they are today. Yet one way women could express their spiritual side was through being a vessel for spiritual enlightenment. Marjorie Kemp and Joan of Arc as examples. Yet they always sailed very close to being accused of witchcraft, or actively were. Women were the guardians of oral folklore and ghost stories as well. Until in the 18th or 19th century, men took more of an interest in these tales and began to collect them for themselves. My choice for a woman who championed folklore and ghost stories is Marie Clothide Balfour. Marie was born in Scotland in the 1860s and she grew up for some time in New Zealand. She was a younger cousin to Robert Louis Stevenson. In her 20s, Maria lived with her vicar husband and baby in the Lincolnshire Cars, where she collected legends from various residents of the local villages, mainly women and little girls. These were published by Folklore in 1891 as The Legend of the Lincolnshire Cars. She also wrote novels, plays, and edited letters from her cousin, Robert Louis Stevenson. In recent decades, the Lincolnshire Car legends came under scrutiny by folklorists and academics. Some claimed that as the stories collected, especially the Buried Moon and Tiddymen tales, were so unusual and not found elsewhere in the country, that this must mean that Marie Clothide Balfour must have made them up. But research by Maureen James, whose PhD was on the legends, shows that these stories were recorded in a way that is highly unlikely to have been made up by Marie herself. There are just too many differing dialect words and styles of storytelling within the collection. And as my favourite of the stories, The Buried Moon, was told to Marie by a little disabled girl, I felt vindicated on both Marie and the little girl's behalf on reading that these are accurate recordings of the local folk tales. Marie really was giving a voice to these marginalised women and girls and didn't deserve to be accused of making the stories up herself. Another aspect of today's episode that really interested me was how the past can affect the ghost encounters that we have, whether you're a team believer or sceptic. We view ghost encounters through the lens of history. The role of women is an excellent way to track or measure this. In 100 or maybe 500 years from now, will the grey ladies who currently waft about castles be replaced by the ghosts of women at work, being active and just as dynamic as their male ghosts? Finally, I was also impressed by the number of women who have played an active role in paranormal investigating and parapsychology. From those early mediums like Ada Goodrich Freer and folklorists like Marie Clothide Balfour, to the pioneers in research like Sue Blackmore and Caroline Watt. Then, of course, there are the wonderful women Bethan and Steph talked about, many of whom are fellow podcasters and writers in the realm of the otherworldly. You can find links to information about all of them on the blog. I'd also like to thank the men out there who champion women in this field, men like Danny Robbins, Kieran O'Keefe and Peter Laws. We won't achieve equality without everyone, no matter your gender identity, working together and respecting one another and celebrating our achievements together. I hope the paranormal community continues to be a space that lifts the voices of those who are often overlooked or who have experienced or are experiencing oppression. The battle for gender equality is not over, and I hope this episode sheds some light on the women who haunt, are haunted, and investigate those hauntings. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to my wonderful guests, EvelynHollow, Deborah Hyde, Bethan Briggs-Miller, and Steph Lay. Weird in the Wade is researched, written, presented, and produced by me, Nat Doig. Theme music is by Tess Savagir.
Hey there, I'm Susie, and I'm the host of Beyond the Ferns podcast. Each week, I take you beyond the headlines into the stories that linger long after the news fades. From chilling true crime and unsolved cold cases, to paranormal encounters, cults, and extraordinary survival stories. It's a little bit of everything for everyone. Whether you're drawn to mysteries, fascinated by the strange and unexplained, or simply love a good story, I focus on the truth, the details, and above all, justice for the victims and survivors. So buckle up, things are about to get a little scary. Follow Beyond the Ferns wherever you get your podcast. Thanks, y'all.
I'm Rob Kirkup, and I am the host of How Haunted, the podcast where we explore the dark history and terrifying ghost stories of some of the UK's most haunted places, with the occasional trip overseas. Every other Friday, you'll hear tales of horror, chilling investigations with real audio from ghost hunts, and even the occasional guest or poltergeist as I prefer to call them. Every October, we go weekly for spooky season, with a month of themed episodes building up to a huge Halloween spooktacular. And at Christmas, I share your own real-life ghost stories in the Nightmare Before Christmas special. So search for How Haunted wherever you get your podcasts, and join me every fortnight as we ask the question, how haunted